what we do, how we do, and why we do what we do. I wanted to talk for just a couple of minutes here in the opening of this prayer set and give some understanding, because we've got more and more people that are beginning to plug in. And I know that I occasionally get asked the question, wanting teaching for harp and bowl, which is what you get out of Revelation chapter 5. John the Revelator, he's called up into heaven, and he's telling us about the revelation of things he sees, things he encounters and experiences. He's in the Spirit, we know in Revelation 1. We know that there is a voice, and he looks up, and there's a door, and he's told and invited to come up here. And when he comes up into this heavenly place, it's his spirit man. It's an encounter in the spirit realm. Paul talked about being called up into the heavens. Paul spoke of the spiritual man that was called up into the third heavens, or the realm of God. And he shared just a little bit about that possibility. And the reason I stress that as a point here is because we need to see that there are biblical examples of this as a reality. Our spirit man can go further and deeper than what we sometimes realize. If we stay in the carnal mind, and we stay in the common sense and what is intellect to us, what we can learn in a book, where we're cheating or robbing ourselves of the more. And there is more. Eye hath not seen, ear hath not heard, neither has it entered into the heart of man what God has prepared for us. Now, we can think that that's talking about heaven and by and by, but I believe it's the very next verse says, but he reveals it to us by the Spirit. So there are things that God has for us to see, has for us to hear, has for us to experience, that is beyond where we are or where we've ever been, that we can only get to by the Spirit. John the Revelator talked about the experience and the encounters that gave birth to the book of Revelation, and it starts was, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day. And because he was in the Spirit, he looks up and sees a spirit door. He hears a spirit voice. He has a spirit opportunity. Come up here. That's saying to his spirit man, come above where you're at. Come above that level. Come above the first heaven level. Come up here. Come into the Spirit. Because in the natural, we live by the rule that Jesus said, where I go, you cannot go. Now that is the rule. Paul spoke of a breaking of that rule. When Paul speaks of being called up into the third heaven. Wait a minute, I thought where Jesus was going, we cannot go. Well, there are spirit rules that are broken only by spirit. Jesus said, they that worship me will worship me in spirit and in truth. So there is a deeper place, there is an other place, there is an up above place that is beyond the natural. Remember when Jesus went to the disciples who had fished all night? And even though they were trained and skilled fishermen, they hadn't caught anything. And he tells them to cast your nets. Now, first of all, who is going to give advice to professional fishermen? But he says to them, cast your nets, even though you've already fished. And you're probably in bad mood and tired, but cast your net. One place it says to the other side. Another place it says into the deep. So both ways of seeing that and reading that speak to us of getting out of the natural, getting out of your toolbox, getting out of what you're accustomed to, getting out of what you know, and trying on the other side. From the flesh to the Spirit. From the shallow to the deep. And so there is this rule that we live by in the natural, but the Spirit is the supernatural. Super is a prefix that means more or other. So God in the supernatural or the spiritual gives us an opportunity to step into the other, to step into the more. When we live by the rules, we can't walk on water. But we can break the natural laws by stepping into the Spirit, our spirit man. Jesus said, they that worship me in spirit and in truth. So what Peter stepped on, when he stepped out of the boat, out of the natural and into the spiritual, he was stepping onto the words, truth of Christ, who said, come. And so when Jesus said, come, he gave him a platform to step on. He gave him truth, spirit released from his spirit. When you see Revelation chapter 5, you're seeing John, who is in the Spirit, he says in chapter 1. He's called up and he's beginning to tell us things in chapter 2 and chapter 3. He sees and hears a download from God that speaks to him about 7 specific churches that were in Asia. And so he writes these letters to these churches. And so that was Revelation. But then you go on, you have chapter 4, which is one of my favorite chapters in the whole Bible. A beautiful chapter, chapter 4. And then you step into chapter 5, and in chapter 5, you have the model of the house of prayer as it is in heaven. And it's sort of a mirror of what you had on the earth that King David tapped into. And even though David couldn't build the temple, he wanted to build something beautiful. He wanted to build a house for the Lord. And even though he didn't have that permission, the favor to do that, because he was a man of war, he was a man of even sin, he was a man of bloody hands, so God wasn't blessing him to do it. It was going to be later in his genealogy, his son would do it. David therefore just laid up the supplies, the building supplies. He had the card to go ahead and get to Lowe's and wherever he needed, to Home Depot, and get the stuff. It was ready, but David couldn't build it. So what David did is he understood the spiritual dynamics, and he went and got the Ark of Presence, the Ark of the Covenant, and this golden box that was precious and supposed to be able to hold what we became knowing of as a manifestation of God's presence. Because on this golden box there was a lid, and there's cherubim, one facing this way and one facing that way. They're facing each other, and their angels' wings are pointed in toward each other. And above the angels' wings would be a manifestation of the glory of God. And it's said to be like a blue flame. The Shekinah, even though the word Shekinah is not in the Bible, it is a common word to Jewish minds of that day to understand this is something other. This is glorious. And so they were experiencing the glorious, something other of God manifesting right there on the mercy seat. That's what the lid was called. The lid of the Ark of the Covenant was called the mercy seat. And so David, what he did is he gets the Ark of the Covenant, he brings it into Jerusalem, the holy city, the capital, and he had made a tent, because he can't build a house for it, so he makes a tent. He pitches a tent, and it's open. It was an open tent, and it's situated inside the tent, and they would dance and pray and worship and play instruments around where the box was, where the presence was. To God, they sang songs. They danced to God. They praised. All of these demonstrations of praise, the 7 Hebrew words of praise, were going on right there. You know, the kneeling, the being prostrate before the Lord, the dancing, the jumping, the hallel, you know, the instantaneous, you know, exclamations of praise, the out loud voices of praise, the singing of praise. All of that was happening 24 hours a day. And it went on for 33 years. And during that 33 years, that nonstop praise, the songs, the dancing, the prayers, the prophetic proclamations, there was no war in the land. Just peace. Because the presence of God was there. Because the presence of God was there, the enemy was pushed back on every corner, and they were free to just worship God. Now, the Lord says in Amos 9:11 that the thing that He wants to restore, that God wants to restore, He didn't mention the tabernacle of Moses, even though it was really neat. He didn't even mention the beautiful temple that Solomon had been able to build. All of the gold and all of the things. But the one thing that God said He wanted to restore in the Old Testament was the fallen tent of David. In the natural, there's nothing special about it. But it was open. And what's different about that is it didn't have the outer inner holy. And the Holy of Holies was, there's a curtain that only the high priest could go into once a year. But David's tabernacle was different because David had a revelation that God isn't really pleased by the offering of blood and of bulls and goats. What He really wants is our praise. The sacrifice of praise. It's the revelation that David had even before Christ had come. He went into the future, which is the Spirit. Because in the Spirit, it's different than the natural. In the natural, we're ruled by these laws. Gravity, time. In the natural, we have time. In the Spirit, there is no time. In the Spirit, it's eternal. It's sci-fi a lot. And so David had been able to get in the Spirit. And so to him, the revelation that is only available in the New Covenant became a reality for him right there. And so God says in Amos 9:11, near the end of the Old Testament, that I want to restore the fallen tent of David. In Revelation 5, we see a model of that in heaven, existing in heaven. And what we see there, because John had been called up into the Spirit, he's receiving revelations. He's even told by a heavenly creature to write. And the reason that he had to write is so that Mickey and Hector and Juan and Shane and Bocho, Tennille and Josie and you can know about it. We don't know about it unless somebody told John in his glorious ecstasy moment of Spirit revelation, stop, write this down. What are you seeing? Write it down. And so we have a note of what he's seen, and what he sees in heaven is this worship. That have in one hand, they have a harp, and in another hand, they have a bowl. And we know what's in the bowl is the prayers of the saints, the incense that is the prayers of the saints. So the two things you have a musical instrument and you have prayer. That's what David incorporated. It's the reason he spent so much time training musicians, creating instruments of praise, is because to him it was a revelation. We're going to take what we do, we're going to take our prayers, and we're going to make them something that is an aroma that ascends into the heavens. In Revelation 5, you see the harp and bowl. And a lot of people get intimidated when they think they're coming here to be part of something where they're going to pray and worship. And what is this harp and bowl? Because we've just not been taught this in church many times, in many places, in many circles. It's something that a revelation that God has restored in these last days. He said He was going to restore it. In Amos 9:11, it's a prophecy that in those days I'm going to restore the fallen tabernacle of David. So we're living in the hour where God's raising again the house of prayer. And the revelation of it is what David did. And it's aroma being lifted unto the Lord. It's different than what you see in regular church services, because church services are trained to minister on a horizontal level, from a microphone, from a pulpit to people. House of prayer ministry is more vertical. It's like what the Levites did, ministering unto the Lord. And the Levites were singers and musicians as well. And David took that, he took it with what he'd sing with Samuel, and he just really gave it a structure. And he took it to another level. And he made the prophetic and the praise and the prayer all come together as one. And Revelation 5 and 8, you see it's so important that it exists in heaven. The harp and bowl, prayer and worship. And that's why I think something so powerful happened in Acts 16, I think. when Paul and Silas were in jail, but at midnight, it lets us know exactly what they did. And it's the first place that you see somebody do this. But it says they prayed and they sang. It happens in the New Testament right there. They prayed and they sang. And when they did, heaven rushed into the earth and earth shook. And not just a ministry unto Paul and Silas, but the whole geography, the whole location, the address was impacted. And so everybody all around them got freed, got delivered, got set free. It's because of their song and their prayer unto God. And it was sacrifice. Their bodies were bruised and beating and hurting in the natural, but their sacrifice of praise and their prayers, their simple prayers unto God, heaven invaded it. It was something on the earth that God could invade, a structure, a formula. And God said He wanted to restore. And you see it in Revelation 5. The Lord said He wanted to restore it. And so we're kind of doing that here as a model.